The NHL is back, and the Devils will be taking on the Detroit Red Wings tomorrow when this episode goes live. And the roster has been set. Were there a couple surprises? And also, let's talk about Connor Hellebuyck signing a lengthy extension with the Winnipeg Jets. Does it affect the Devils? And what do I think about their goaltending tandem heading into the new year? There's a lot to break down in today's episode. Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential MIA member Trey Matthews. Before we get into today's agenda, first, a few shout-outs. So, shout-out number one to all of you hockey fans. The NHL is officially back. I enjoyed watching some of the telecasts on ESPN. So, first, I tuned into the Chicago Blackhawks taking on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Crosby and Bedard, must-see TV. Crosby obviously entering year 18, and then Bedard, the highly touted prospect. Hopefully he can become the next NHL superstar. He was able to pick up his first career NHL point, secondary assist on Ryan Donato's goal. So that was really exciting to see. And also, the Penguins did not fix their issues, like I just mentioned, because Erik Karlsson didn't really play all that good defensively. And the Blackhawks were able to come back and win the game. And then obviously I had to tune into the Seattle Kraken and Vegas Golden Knight game because I don't know how many of you know this, but the Seattle Kraken are actually my second favorite NHL team because my mentor is their radio play-by-play announcer. And obviously the Golden Knights are the reigning Stanley Cup champs. And unfortunately, the Golden Knights were able to come out victorious against the Kraken by a score of 4-1, and it was still exciting to see, and I'm glad that the NHL is back. I think a lot of people are excited, so I can't wait for the Devils to take on the Detroit Red Wings this Thursday at The Rock. It's going to be really exciting. Devils obviously have a lot of expectations, and also shout out number two, while I'm on the subject of ESPN and their telecast, I want to give a shout out to former New Jersey Devil PK Subban for appearing on First Take once again, basically to spread the good word about the NHL. So I had to wear my PK Subban jersey. If you're watching on YouTube, I wish I can turn around and show you, but just take my word for it. So I love that Subban is a big polarizing figure in the NHL community, and he's appearing on ESPN, basically educating Stephen A. Smith about hockey, because as many of you know, the only thing that Stephen A. Smith knows about hockey is that the ice is white and the puck is black, and he's friends with Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL. So that's all he knows. But it was great to see NHL back on my television set once more. But this time, the game's counting for real, and I can't wait for it to become the Devils' turn. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's talk about the agenda for today's episode. So in the first segment, I'm going to talk about the 2023-2024 roster for Devils because it was set a couple days ago at, I believe, 7 p.m. Eastern time. There were a couple surprises, and obviously one of the bigger talking points was Simon Nemec being sent down to Utica to begin the season. If you guys missed it, I did a two-part collaboration with Jersey Joe of Heads Up Hockey Podcast and also my fellow writer over at Pucks and Pitchforks, and we discussed the possibility of Nemec joining the Devils on opening night, what his role might be, and what he did during the course of preseason. So I'm going to revisit that in segment one. Then in segment two, Jesper, Bratt, and Brendan Smith shared their expectations. And I must say, even though Brendan Smith is not all that good of a player on the sheet of ice, he is a tremendous leader in the locker room. So he shared something with Devils team reporter Amanda Stein that I felt as though was worth sharing on today's episode. So that'll be in the second segment. And then to round it all off, in segment three, we're going to circle back to Connor Hellebuyck and him signing his lengthy new extension with the Winnipeg Jets, what it means to the Devils, and how the Devils goaltending tandem looks heading into the new season. So let's talk about the roster for the Devils. So it's officially official. Here are some of the names that you might hear public address announcer Adam Hamway say at The Rock a few times throughout the course of the year. So For the forwards, you got Nathan Bastian, Jesper Bratt, Eric Haula, Nico Hischier, Alexander Holtz, Jack Hughes, Curtis Lazar, Michael McLeod, Timo Meier, Dawson Mercer, Tomas Nosek, Andre Palat, Chris Tierney. We're going to talk about him momentarily, and obviously Tyler Toffoli. Then for the defensemen, Kevin Ball, Dougie Hamilton, Luke Hughes, John Marino, Colin Miller, Jonas Siegenthaler, and Brendan Smith. I'm going to hold off on the goalie tandem momentarily because, like I just mentioned, it's going to circle back to my discussion with Connor Hellebuyck in the third and final segment. But obviously, it's going to be Akira Schmidt and Vitek Vanecek. So once more, I'll save that towards the end of the episode. But let's look at some of the surprising moves for the Devils heading into the new year. And I think when it comes to the forwards, it has to be Chris Tierney because that's a name we haven't really discussed during the course of training camp and also the preseason. I certainly didn't talk about him on my show extensively. The only time I talked about Chris Tierney was back in July when he signed his two-way deal with the Devils. Now, why was this surprising? Well, in my opinion, and this goes back to what Ben Burnell put out on the X app during the course of the summer. As you guys know, Ben is a friend of the show. He is a writer for Daily Sentinel Sports. He covers the Utica Comets. He basically said that the signing of Chris Tierney should help with the Comets' depth at the center position. And a lot of people were making the speculation that maybe Tierney was going to be a replacement for Michael McLeod in case his scandal went south. Because as you guys know, Michael McLeod and his Team Canada scandal started to pick back up during the course of the summer. I didn't get any new information. For the time being, McLeod is set to put on his Devil sweater and suit up for the Devils in their first game against the Red Wings this Thursday. That's all the new information I have for you guys. And unfortunately, that's where we stand. So for the time being, Tierney is on the roster for the Devils. I personally thought it was just going to be a move for the Comets, but Ryan Novositsky put this out on the X app. He said, shout out to Chris Tierney, because once again, we didn't really talk about him. I don't think he's going to add much to the roster. He didn't do that much last year when he was playing with the Florida Panthers and Montreal Canadiens. So personally, I think this was a political move for the Devils because you don't want to get people like Graham Clark and Nolan Foote onto your roster and they just be a healthy scratch for the most part. So shout out to Tierney for making the open night roster for the Devils. I thought he would be waived so that way he can be sent back to Utica, but here we are. And now the main talking point for the Devils and the entire discourse was Simon Nemec, because it was recently revealed that Nemec would begin the season with the Comets. Now, he really did perform well during the course of preseason. Yes, he made a few mistakes that were costly, but similar to what Jersey Joe said during our part 2 collaboration, that's to be expected, and you're going to have to work out some of those kinks. So Luke Hughes, he was able to work out some of his kinks about being too jumpy defensively. So that was the main question for Nemec. Now, the thing was he able to outperform some of his competitors, which included Colin Miller, who was also a right-handed defenseman. But the problem is that if Nemec was added to the roster, he would have been a third pairing defenseman or an extra defenseman. So he would have been a seventh defenseman. So I think the Devils saw that he wouldn't be given a big opportunity to really showcase his skill set because let's face it, Nemec, he is the second overall pick for the Devils a couple drafts ago, and he definitely has a high ceiling. I'm really excited to see what he could do offensively for this team. And we know that the Devils are big on these like huge defenseman-like players who have an offensive game. So I think for Nemec, his time is coming, and he definitely was able to showcase his skill set as training camp progressed, similar to what Lindy Ruff said, and obviously during the course of preseason. So I think the big thing for Nemec was that anytime he did make a mistake defensively, he was able to make up for it offensively. So he just has a few kinks to work out, but if there's an injury or if Colin Miller and Brendan Smith just aren't cutting it for the Devils, you could best believe that we're going to see Simon Nemec make his NHL debut sooner rather than later. But I think this was the right call because once again, this circles back to Chris Tierney and it maybe being a political move. So I think for Nemec, he's going to be given a much bigger opportunity in Utica to showcase what he can do. So I think that really sets him up for great success, and his time will come sooner rather than later. So the roster has been set for the Devils. Not many surprises. I think the only quote-unquote big surprise was Chris Tierney, and the main talking point was Simon Nemec. But once again, I don't think Tierney's going to have that big of a role on the Devils roster, and Nemec, his time will come. So before we move on to the next subject, let me tell you guys about BetterHelp. So this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. So as you guys know, I've been covering the Devils for a few years, and sometimes it could take a toll on me mentally, whether I see a nasty comment in the YouTube section, or maybe I'm not given a good review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It definitely can take a toll on me. I obviously have some of my personal battles as well, but this is not about me. I want to help you guys as well. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. So make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. So visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNHL today to get 10% off your first month. Once again, everybody needs some help. Everyone goes through something. So I highly recommend BetterHelp. Okay, so let's talk about some of the expectations for the Devils, because obviously the bar has been set rather high this year. The Devils are no longer the underdogs heading into the 2023-2024 season, and they're going to have a huge target on their back. So obviously we've been seeing some of the simulations done by NHL 24. They said after so-and-so simulations, they are projecting for the Devils to win the Stanley Cup. They think that Jack Hughes is going to win the Hart, which more power to them. And by the way, I think Shell 24 has now surpassed Spider-Man 2 for Game of the Year. But jokes aside, there's a lot of expectations for the Devils heading into the new year, and the players are well aware of that. So team reporter Amanda Stein recently asked both Jesper Bratt and Brandon Smith what those expectations might look like and how the season might progress from their perspective. Here's what Jesper Bratt had to share first.
Last season, when you entered the season, it was about, setting expectations for yourselves. Now there's a lot of external pressure where the bar seems to be a lot higher because of what you accomplished. What do you think the biggest difference is, mentality-wise or strategic-wise, for you guys to deal with here?
Well, for us, we worked so hard for those expectations. We do take a lot of pride in that, and we worked really hard for it. And now it's just up to us to set up these short-term goals throughout the season. It's going to come down to each and every day to get better and take every single game like it is our last. Like we talked about before, I think this season, when it comes from expectation from other people and other teams, obviously this season is going to be a tough test for us. And as of now, every day in training camp has been great. I feel like those preseason games, we really set the standard high for ourselves and as a group, and we're ready to face that challenge.
What do you think the toughest expectation is internally for you guys to manage?
Obviously, there's things that we're going to face. We're going to face some really good teams. They're going to do everything they can to beat the top teams in the league. I just know that from previous experience, from when we weren't that high in the standing and you played the great teams, you wanted to prove them wrong and you wanted to win against those teams. And I think right now we're in a position where every team is going to look at us and have that team to beat. So, but that's the pressure that we want. That's the expectations that we want, and we're ready to take on that stuff.
Okay, so like I said at the beginning of the episode, Brendan Smith is a fantastic leader within the locker room. I love having the chance to speak with him one-on-one. He's very insightful, and his soundbite was no different. So before I share my thoughts, here's what Brendan Smith had to say about expectations and how the team needs to perform going into this year.
Last year, where you're setting the bar for yourselves, versus this year where that bar has now, been really raised.
Yeah, I think we even kind of talked about it today, but I think our goal for him, we're aware that the bar is, whatever you can say, been set or there's expectation. Mm-hmm. But for us, it's just every day try to get better so that you can be good for the game. So we're just looking at every game and trying to win that game, and then kind of where everything, all the chips fall, that's what's going to happen. But we're not going to try to get ahead of ourselves is what I'm saying, because obviously at the end of the day, you're just trying to look for a ticket to the dance, to the playoffs, and but that's so far off. And like I told you guys last year, it's like it's really the October, November, December time of the year when if you can get out there and kind of get your wins early, it kind of solidifies your position, because then you're not chasing at the end, and it becomes very difficult because everybody's trying to play really well, and that last little playoff push is really hard. So if you can kind of dial it in early and go game by game, I think that's what gives you the biggest chance for success. And I said that last year. We did a great job. And I think our message is don't get ahead of ourselves.
Did you feel that was a lesson that a lot of these guys really learned last year through the experience of a long winning streak, all that stuff?
Yeah, I hope so, and I think so. I've been trying to preach that, and I know guys like Powley and Holla, we did that last year, and it kind of was indicative of what the outcome was of the year.
I agree with everything Brendan Smith said, because here's the thing for the Devils. Last year, they went on a 13-game win streak, and that really helped them because if you guys recall, the month of December, as soon as Nathan Bastian went down, and early January, it was definitely a slaughter fest for the Devils, and not in a good way because they were the ones getting slaughtered. I was there firsthand at the Prudential Center towards the end of 2022. It was a drag to the finish line. They were limping across it, and they were hoping for anything to try to regain their momentum. But the one thing that the Devils were able to hold on to was that 13-game win streak, because they were able to pick up 26 points during that time span. And those points matter as the year progressed, because a lot of people remember the Devils' 13-game win streak, but a lot of people might forget that the Devils went on a 6-game winless streak at one point or another. So those definitely come back to bite you, especially when it comes to the standings in the Metropolitan Division, because it came down to like the final game or two before the Devils were set at number 2 in the Metro and were slated to take on the New York Rangers in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But if you guys recall, in January, the Devils, once again, they were in a pretty heated battle in terms of the standings in the Metro, because they had to worry about the New York Rangers. They had to worry about the Carolina Hurricanes, who were on a hot streak. They had to worry about the New York Islanders, who were still relatively decent at the time. I know the Islanders made the playoffs, but let's face it, they also limped across the finish line. But the point I'm just trying to make is that going into this year, are the Devils going to go on another 13-game win streak? It could happen, but remember, it's really hard to do. And regardless of what anyone says, 13-game win streaks don't happen, because remember when the Devils were going on their losing streak, they were struggling in December and also January. People were like, this team is fraudulent. That 13-game win streak meant nothing. It doesn't just happen out of thin air, because realistically, the Devils have one of the longest win streaks in NHL history. I just want to put that out there. So going into this new year, Brendan Smith is definitely right, which is when October becomes a little later, when it becomes November, when it becomes December, the Devils need to start counting their stars and racking up as many points as they potentially can get, because once again, they're no longer the underdogs. They are the team to beat in the Metro alongside with the Carolina Hurricanes. And even though they're old, you got a team like the New York Rangers on your back trying to take your spot away in the Metro, and the Rangers want second or first, whatever the case might be. But I think the team to be in the first position is the Carolina Hurricanes. Then right after them, it's the Devils. So the Devils are well aware of that, and they know that the expectations are going to be a little bit different because they're no longer the dark horses. So that's my thing, and I agree with Smith, which is early on in the season, even if they are struggling at one point or another, the Devils really got to know, how do you break out of that funk? How do you try to get at least a point out of a dogfight game? Because that's the one thing I could say if the Devils are on a losing streak, which is, can they at least take it into overtime or a shootout and just try to walk away with a point so that way they don't walk away with nothing? So Brendan Smith and his leadership on full display right there. But my personal expectations going into the new year for the Devils, I think they're going to be just fine when it comes to racking up the wins and also racking up the points, because their roster has improved. Because remember, first half of the year, Timo Meier wasn't there, and now they added Tyler Toffoli to an already stacked top 6. And then when you look at their third line, like they were rolling out during the preseason for a few games, you have Andre Palat, you got Eric Haula, who is, by the way, day-to-day when it comes to injuries, and also Dawson Mercer. So that's just a hypothetical third line for the Devils, and I think a lot of teams would kill for that. So I think the Devils are definitely one of the more talented teams in the NHL. I think one of their biggest issues is definitely going to be injuries, and another X factor that we're going to discuss in the third and final segment is the goaltending tandem. So are Vitek Vanecek and Akira Schmid the go-to guys for the Devils? Will they lead them to the promised land? We'll discuss that momentarily. But before we continue, I want to tell you guys about Jase Case. So the Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jase Case is to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, jump on a quick call with one of their board-certified physicians. Get ongoing care from their physicians on any treatment-related questions. Doctor created, doctor recommended. Don't be caught off guard if something bad happens. You can rely on Jase Case. So get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Case Medical by using the code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. And now, let me tell you guys about Sleeper. I love using the app. I'm in the midst of my fantasy football season right now, but the NHL season is finally here. Will the Devils head to the Stanley Cup Finals? I absolutely love the NHL, and I know you do too. That's why I want to tell you about the Sleeper app. The Sleeper app is the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network, and it's my go-to for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you could get 100 times your cash on daily fantasy. So there's a lot of great superstars in the league, including up-and-coming ones like Jack Hughes or Nate McKinnon, Connor McDavid, obviously, Pastrnak, Kachuk, you name it. So use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Okay, let's talk about one of the biggest storylines for the NHL heading into the new year. And it doesn't exactly involve the Devils, but in an indirect sort of way, it kind of does. And that is Connor Hellebuyck. So it was recently revealed that Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck signed identical 7-year contract extensions with the Winnipeg Jets on an average annual value of $8.5 million. Wow. So I'll talk about my thoughts for Connor Hellebuyck momentarily, but we were talking about during the course of the offseason that Hellebuyck wanted out of the Jets' franchise, and one of his ideal destinations was New Jersey because he saw what they were forming. They're a young, up-and-coming team, but at the same time, they're one of the top teams in the entire NHL. So I think Hellebuyck wanted to be a part of that because he felt as though his window to potentially win a Stanley Cup was closing, and he didn't feel like it was going to come into fruition if he was with the Jets. So that was one of the bigger storylines during the course of the offseason, with one of the best goalies in today's generation join the Devils. And I shared my opinions over the summer. I said I would have loved to have Hellebuyck on the roster for the Devils, but the problem I was seeing was the financial situation. So don't get me wrong, the cap is projected to go up much higher come next year, which we'll talk about in a future episode, because that's going to really help the Devils when it comes to Dawson Mercer and possibly Tyler Toffoli. But digressing a little bit, when you see this contract that Hellebuyck signed with the Jets, $8.5 million annually, 7 years. That is a big pill to swallow. And that was one of the things that I feared, which is if the Devils were to break the bank for Hellebuyck, they're basically getting a rental, because I don't think the Devils are going to cough up that type of contract for Hellebuyck, given the fact that they still have to re-sign Dawson Mercer, Tyler Toffoli, Luke Hughes. He's going to need a new contract in a couple years. Basically, I didn't want the Devils to be up to their eyes in depth and also worried about what could potentially happen to some of the other players on their roster and key assets, might I add. So that was what worried me a little bit. So a lot of people were concerned about the Devils goaltending tandem going into the new year. And some of your concerns were in fact valid, because a lot of people saw what happened in the playoffs with Vitek and Akira, at least in the second round. But I'll talk about that momentarily. Did the Devils miss out on Hellebuyck? Like, should they have broken the bank for Hellebuyck? I still stand by the fact that if the Devils were in a win now scenario, then you go after someone like Hellebuyck. But the problem is the Devils aren't exactly in win now. a lot of their key assets are locked up long-term. So Jack Hughes is here long-term. Jesper Bratt, Nico Hischier, Andre Palat, Timo Meyer, Dougie Hamilton. A lot of key players for the Devils are here to stay for a good while. Now, if Hischier, Bratt, and Hughes were getting up there in age, if they were towards the end of their contracts, like if they only had like 1 or 2 years remaining, then maybe you try to go after someone like Hellebuyck because you're desperate to try to get that Stanley Cup while your window is potentially open. So an example that I can use is the Pittsburgh Penguins. They are in win now. So all the respect in the world for Letang, Malkin, and obviously Crosby sticking together for nearly 2 decades. I was actually stunned when it was revealed that they had been around together in the NHL with the Penguins organization for now 18 seasons. That is incredible. That doesn't happen too often in any sport. But at the same time, the Penguins are not as young as they once were. And they've obviously won their fair share of Stanley Cups in the last decade or so. But the problem is their window is starting to close. You can't keep Crosby, Letang, and Malkin together forever. And they're one of the oldest teams in the NHL. No, in fact, they are the oldest team in the NHL. So that's why they go after someone like Erik Karlsson, because they know their window is starting to shrink. The Devils are not in that situation. The Devils are still one of the youngest teams in the NHL, and a lot of their key core pieces are here for a lengthy period of time. So the Devils aren't in win now, and honestly, this is a good scenario for them to be in because it means they have plenty of chances to try to capture the Stanley Cup. So I think a lot of organizations would love to be in the quote-unquote situation that the Devils are in. So going after Hellebuyck, I don't think it would have been worth it in the grand scheme of things because you'd be breaking the bank for a rental. So would it make sense to trade away Alexander Holtz, who, by the way, I don't mind trading away, but I don't think it would make sense to trade away Holtz, who still has a lot of potential and can definitely blossom into something special, to get a 1-year rental. And what if the Devils don't win the Stanley Cup? There's no guarantee that will happen. So I don't think that would have been a smart move by Fitzgerald, quite honestly, because we've already seen the Devils break the bank a little bit for a goalie, because remember, they traded away their 13th overall pick for Corey Schneider, and that pick ended up becoming Bo Horvat. So just putting that out there, that's a good example to circle back to. I know that it's probably not the same as Connor Hellebuyck, but still, you get the point I'm trying to make. So when it comes to Vitek and Akira, are they the most dynamic goalie tandem in the entire NHL? No, but at the same time, they're not complete duds either. We saw what Akira did in round 1 against the New York Rangers. He was the first Devils goalie rookie to start in a playoff game since Martin Brodeur did it in like the mid-90s, 1994. And then for Vitek Vanacek, 30-plus wins don't just happen out of thin air. I don't care what you say. Like, Vanacek was still solid in between the pipes. I remember Christy Flannery of the Hockey News. She appeared on my show during the summer, and she said one of her unsung heroes was Vitek Vanacek because he was one of the reasons why the Devils had such a historic season. So I'm just putting that out there, which is, yes, Akira and Vitek, you're absolutely right. They're not going to light the league on fire. They're not the best goalie tandem in the entire NHL. I will agree with you 100%. But at the same time, let's not act like they're complete duds or they're completely useless. I still think they have a lot to showcase for the Devils, and I'm excited to see what they can do. Now, if Vitek doesn't perform well in the playoffs yet again, then maybe you start to raise that red flag and say maybe we should search for a better goalie. But think of Akira Schmid. Akira Schmid still has a lot of room to grow and develop. He's very tall. Obviously, Ken Danica has been raving about his long legs, and he sort of like reminds me of Eddie Lack in a sense. That's why Eddie Lack was nicknamed the Stork, because of his very long legs. And Eddie Lack is a friend of the show, and he's also a former Devil. So we'll see what happens. But I think Vitek and Akira will be just fine. I think the Devils, while they don't have the best goalie tandem in the NHL, I think they are far, far, far from worse. I think they're solid at best. I think they're going to be just fine. And I think they're ready to give the Devils more wins. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, what do you think about the roster heading into this season? Do you have faith in Akira and Vitek? Here's your guys' thoughts. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X page at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. So continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Once again,